Good evening. Calling this meeting to order. Clerk, would you mind taking the roll?
Good evening. Commissioner Hom?
Here.
Commissioner Poley?
Here.
Commissioner Shelby? Here. Commissioner Tatishi? Commissioner Martinson? You have a quorum.
Thank you. Would you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If we have anyone from the public that would like to speak this evening, if you could please sign up in the back, and then I would ask that you stand to take the oath. Is anyone speaking this evening?
Any applicants?
This includes the applicants. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't clear. Thank you. So applicants and those from the public that are speaking, again, please make sure you sign up back there. And then do you mind
Administering the oath.
administering the oath? Thank you.
Please raise your right hand, and the appropriate response is, I do. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give this commission is the truth, so help you God? If you do not swear, do you so affirm? When you go to the podium, please state your name for the record in the statement, I have been sworn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 1, we have a request to continue the item to October 28th.
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Could we vote, please?
Unanimous vote.
Thank you.
Item number 2, PLMP 2019-00139, tentative subdivision map, special development permit, and design review. Owner, Earthetex, applicant Abraham Rampuram, located at 8945 Fair Oaks Boulevard, approximately 450 feet west of the Fair Oaks Boulevard and San Juan Avenue intersection in the Carmichael community. Environmental doc is a negative declaration.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Meredith Holsworth. I'm the project manager for the 8 Oaks at Carmichael project. The project site is located at 8945 Fair Oaks Boulevard, just west of the San Juan intersection in the Carmichael community, and the site is zoned RD20. The request is for a tentative subdivision map to divide the 1-acre site into 8 single-family lots, a special development permit to allow reductions to the lot widths, the setback measurements, and perimeter landscaping adjacent to the residential zoning. Also included in this request is a design review entitlement. Here is the proposed tentative map showing the access drive along the bottom of your screen, which is the eastern property line. That access drive also connects to the property adjacent to the north. And this is also showing you the proposed layout of the 8 lots. This is the proposed site plan showing the sound wall that will be going along the frontage along Fair Oaks Boulevard. There were previously several structures on site that have been demolished in order to develop the site with the proposal before you. The proposal does include the mentioned sound wall that will be going along Fair Oaks Boulevard, as well as wooden perimeter fencing along all other property lines. A mitigated neg deck was prepared to address noise, biological resources, and cultural resources. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over that slide for you. The DRAC met on June 13th this year and recommended that the project be found in substantial compliance with our countywide design guidelines. The Carmichael CPAC reviewed the project on June 19th and recommended a unanimous approval with 1 member absent. The findings can be made for this project as proposed, and staff finds that the requested deviations are appropriate in this case, as the project is a single-family product within a multifamily zone, and therefore staff is recommending approval. The recommended actions before you are to determine that the environmental analysis is complete and adequate, to adopt the mitigated neg deck and MMRP, to approve the tentative subdivision map and special development permit, and to find the project in substantial compliance with the countywide design guidelines. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions. We have the applicant team here as well.
Questions?
Oh, all right. I have one question. Good evening, Meredith.
Good evening.
I'm not sure if this question is going to be for you or the applicant, but since we're evaluating a deviation to the side yard to 3 feet, with the 3 feet deviation, there's some building code issues on regulating the amount of openings on that side yard for the building codes. So did the draft take that into account so the exterior elevations won't be changing? I mean, it's been calculated, it's good to go.
The DRAC did discuss the side yard setbacks, and they were basically looking at it as 3 feet on each side and didn't have an issue with the 6 feet total. I can't speak to the building aspect of that part, but I can defer to the applicant and see if they have any additional information.
I'll wait, I'll ask that.
Sure.
Then. Okay, thank you.
Nothing else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Could we ask the applicant to come up?
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. Steve Norman with CNA Engineering. I'm here representing the applicant on this project. We're just here to say that we concur with the staff report and all the conditions within the staff report. Items or issues with the site plan, as you had just mentioned, the architect is here this evening, and he can answer any questions you have about the architectural aspect.
It's pretty straightforward because it will come out during plan check, but it could affect the exterior elevation. So I just want to make sure you're good to go. That's
Yes.
it.
I'm pretty sure, but the architect's here. He can speak to that. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kevin Bryan with Donald Joseph Architects. I have been sworn. Yes, so with that 3-foot minimum clearance that we have, we meet the requirements of Type 5 light wood construction, non-rated, and we can
15%
have...
opening and all that business?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we're good to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? I don't see speaker requests from the public. No? Okay, with that, up for discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve staff recommendations.
I'll second it.
Okay, call for a vote.
Unanimous vote with those members present.
Thank you.
Item number 2, General Plan Amendment PLMP 2019-00038, General Plan Amendment and Zoning Ordinance Amendment. Owner applicant Metro Air Park LLC, located east of the Sacramento International Airport and Power Line Road, west of Lone Tree Road, and between West Alberta Road and North Bayou Way in the Natomas community. Environmental doc is addendum to prior and final environmental impact report.
Thank you. Good evening once again. I do apologize for my voice or lack thereof. Hopefully I can make it through this one. I'll also be presenting the Metro Air Park SPA and General Plan Amendment project. This project site is the Metro Air Park SPA, which is located adjacent to the airport and north of I-5 up in the Natomas community. This is a closer up illustrative composite that shows the relation of the SPA to the airport, as well as to the Greenbrier residential project within the city of Sacramento limits. The Metro Air Park SPA properties were originally zoned for airport-related uses, and through several amendments over the years, these uses will be more varied to respond to the changing market trends and the vision from the Property Owners Association. The objective within this subject amendment is to continue to respond to those changing markets and the demands by downgrading certain roadway sections. In conjunction with that main goal, there are some other revisions that we're proposing in order to just provide clarification and clean up some items that may have been overlooked in previous amendments. This chart here shows what changes are proposed within the general plans. That's within the transportation plan of the circulation element. And so all these listed road segments are proposed to be downgraded from 4-lane arterials down to 2-lane local streets. The revisions to the actual Metro Air Park SPA document would then include matching those same roadway downgrades where applicable in the document, as well as inclusion of some standards for when the future facilities are actually going to be installed. This will include some more specific language regarding the installation and the maintenance of the signage that's proposed through the Metro Air Park Master Sign Program. A complete overhaul of the Metro Air Park design guidelines was adopted last October by the board, and since then staff and applicants have come across a few areas that needed some additional clarification or just a little bit of reworking so that implementation would be easier to achieve. So we use this amendment as an opportunity to adjust those areas. Some of those included fixes to some of the road and sign location figures, making sure that some of the road sections matched. Their different angles may have showed one line of trees and the other may have shown 2 lines of trees, so we wanted to make sure all that matched up. It also included some more detail regarding landscaping along road sections and how accent rock would be used along those street sections as well. And then just a few other minor revisions for clarification purposes. The Natoma CPAC reviewed the project on May 9th, and they didn't have a quorum, but decided to go ahead and review the item and recommended approval with the members present. The design review administrator supports the proposed revisions to the Metro Air Park design guidelines, and staff is recommending approval. The recommendations before you will go to the board for the final hearing, but those actions are to recognize the addendum and determine the prior final EIR is still adequate and appropriate, to approve the resolution amending the general plan circulation element, and to approve the ordinance amending Metro Air Park SPA. That does conclude my presentation. The applicant is here for this project as well.
Do you have questions?
Just a couple of questions. So what we're reviewing is just the downgrade of the specific identified roadways, right?
It will be, that's the general plan amendment portion is just the change to the roadways. The SPA amendment includes the amendments to the design guidelines, as well as those performance standards I mentioned about implementation of facility installation and signage installation.
As far as the landscape, does the county have like a staff architect as part of the planning team?
We do. As part of our planning team, that reviews all of the design reviews. We have an architect that's the design review administrator, as well as a landscape architect that reviews the projects.
I'm going to assume, because I see some changes on the species of landscape trees, and which is very important because the overall ambience of the new public right-of-ways and all that. So I'm going to guess we got a thumbs up from the landscape architect.
The landscape architect was heavily involved in the discussions.
All right, here we go. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak?
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Tom Ramus. I've been duly sworn, and I add a few things. I think the presentation pretty much covers everything, but the real impetus of this general plan and the changes in the SPA came from our prior SPA amendment, which was just passed in December. And during that process, we saw that the traffic studies that were done many years ago were different than now and showed a downsizing or a lowering of traffic counts and whatnot, and made us able to take a look at downsizing some of these roads. And in addition, there was the county's desire to keep Powerline Road open in our original SPA that was going to be abandoned to allow airport access. And now that is not going to be the case. So by putting this additional north-south road, it allowed other roads to be re-looked at. So that's where we're looking forward to having this go forward, and we have a lot of projects in the pipeline that are looking for this to be ratified. So thank you very much. For any questions?
No?
Not for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see speakers from the public for this item, so call for a vote.
Yeah, I move to approve staff recommendation.
I'll second that.
You didn't want to vote before motions? I'm teasing.
Unanimous vote with those members present.
Thank you, guys.
Item number 4, PLMP 2018-00228, General Plan Amendment, County of Sacramento Office of Planning and Environmental Review Division, Environmental Doc, Addendum to Prior Final Environmental Impact Report.
Give this a moment to load. Okay. Good evening. My name is Emma Patton. I'm with the Office of Planning and Environmental Review and the project manager for the Dry Creek Road and Loop Road General Plan Amendment. The subject road sections for the Dry Creek Road Loop Road General Plan Amendment include Dry Creek Road from U Street to Loop Road and Loop Road from 16th Street to Alberta Road. These particular road sections are located in the Rio Linda, Alberta community and specifically within the Alberta Specific Plan boundary. The Alberta Specific Plan identifies these particular roadway sections as standard capacity 2-lane roadways. However, the general plan identifies these road sections as arterials or 4-lane roadways. Here is the existing general plan transportation figure showing these segments of Dry Creek Road and Loop Road as arterials. And here is the proposed general plan transportation figure showing these particular roadway sections as standard capacity 2-lane roads or local roads as defined by the general plan. Staff brought this request to the Rio Linda Alberta CPAC back in June. There was a unanimous approval at that meeting based on that recommendation and the discussion in the staff report. Staff is recommending approval of the project. The final hearing authority for this project is the Board of Supervisors, and therefore this evening your vote is a recommendation to them. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
No questions for me, thank you.
James? Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have an applicant for this? Is there?
We do not have an applicant for this item. The county initiated this general plan amendment. However, we do have some folks in attendance this evening that may be signed up to speak. We do not. So yeah, there's no one signed up to speak, and the county is the applicant for this item.
Thank you. Discussion?
I'm going to say, since it seems like there's nobody contesting this, I'll make a recommendation to approve staff recommendations.
I'll second it.
Okay, call for a vote.
Unanimous vote with those members present.
Then, do I understand we have a workshop now? Thank you.
That's correct.
Item number 5, workshop on transportation mitigation strategy for Jackson Highway Master Plans, West Jackson Highway Master Plan, PLMP 2008-00240, Jackson Township Specific Plan, PLMP 2011-00095, New Bridge Specific Plan, PLMP 2010-00081, and Mather South Community Master Plan, PLMP 2013-00065. Environmental doc is not applicable.
Good evening, Commissioners. Todd Smith down over here as Matt gets ready to do the presentation. This is, again, just a workshop on the final version of the transportation mitigation strategy for Jackson Highway Corridor. We were last here in June of last year. At that point, we had a nearly final draft, but it's taken some editing along the way. And Matt from Department of Transportation is here to present the final.
All right, thanks, Todd. This is, let me get this a little lower. So as Todd said, my name is Matt Darrow with the Department of Transportation, and I'm here today to talk about the Jackson Corridor Master Plan's Transportation Workshop. And this is the same presentation I gave to the Board of Supervisors in July, so we thought it would be a nice idea to bring it to the Planning Commission to show you what was adopted. And that said, I want to bring the Planning Commission up to speed on where we are with a few transportation-related items. Specifically, I have a brief update on the trip reduction strategy and trail network, and an overview of the joint traffic analysis and those findings. And after I go through this information, I'll be discussing the Jackson Corridor Development Project Transportation Mitigation Strategy, which was approved by the board in July. And if anyone has any questions on the geographic area that we're covering, please refer to the vicinity map that's in your package. So the Jackson Corridor projects are going to include a trip reduction strategy that will include trip reduction services listed here. If you refer to the slide, commute trip reduction program support services, ride share matching and van pool coordination, guaranteed ride home services, parking management, etc. And in a time where we see rapidly changing mobility options like bike sharing, scooters, autonomous shuttles, the proposed strategy allows for flexibility due to an uncertain future of technological advances in transportation. The strategy will be phased in early in development, so trip reduction behaviors become established in individuals as the plan develops. And of course, a traditional transit service will be part of this plan. Funding for this strategy will likely either be a property assessment, an annexation into a CSA 10, or the creation of something similar. So now I want to point out some of the highlights of the proposed transit service. And if you refer to the slide, the transit service will connect the proposed land uses to light rail. It's going to connect the proposed land uses between the plan areas. And there will be separate networks in each plan area established for each standalone project, and a combined network established for the multiple plan areas, which will improve efficiency of the whole network when everything develops. And service will be provided on a 15 or 30-minute headway for peak or off-peak hours. And when the Jackson Corridor plan area is built out, the daily boardings of the combined network, which I'll show on the next slide, is anticipated to be about 16,000 plus. So your agenda attachments show the individual project transit networks for your reference, but what I'm showing on this slide is a figure depicting the combined transit network for the entire Jackson Corridor area. So the Jackson Express is shown as in green, and you can see that if you look closely, it connects the light rail at Sunrise to the light rail at Watt and travels through the 4 plan areas. The Kiefer Jackson local route is shown here in pink, and it's a local route that'll connect the land uses in a handful of these project areas to the light rail at Watt. And then the West Jackson local routes shown here in yellow is the same sort of thing, ending at a light rail station in Watt. Now, the Jackson Corridor plan area will also include a network of off-roadway trails that will encourage alternative modes of travel in the form of biking and walking. And this network has collaboratively been developed to link future residential communities with schools, parks, transit centers, and employment and commercial land uses. The network will include regional, conventional, and local trails, which are sized respectively 12 feet, 10 feet, and 8 feet paved. Some additional features of the trail network include connectivity to existing and future regional trails outside the plan area, some enhanced crossings at major intersections, and allowance for 2 bridge crossings of the Folsom South Canal. And one final note worth pointing out is that the SCTDF funding for 38% of the regional trails is contained in the SCTDF. And so what I'm showing on this next slide here is the Jackson Corridor Plan trail network. And the figure on the slide is an attachment in your agenda package. It's quite busy. So what I want to highlight here is the regional trails shown highlighted in green, and the conventional trails now shown here highlighted in red, with the simple purpose of illustrating that the network is extensive. So the next thing I want to discuss is a summary of the joint traffic analysis for the Jackson Corridor Plan area. And this is where I'll point out, if you look at the slide, working from left to right, what's shaded out is the traffic study area. And then inside that shaded out area, you see 4 different colors. We start with West Jackson in red on the left. We start working to the east in gold with Jackson Township. In pink, we have May through South, and in blue, we have what we call Newbridge. And as you can imagine, the scope of this traffic study for this development covered a broad study area, as you can see here in the shaded out area, and it was coordinated with the listed neighboring jurisdictions. The study evaluated both individual plan area project impacts as well as impacts for all 4 projects combined. It identified impacted roadway segments and intersections. It also identified each individual plan area's fair share of those roadway segment and intersection impacts. The slide shows an example taken directly from the study showing some of these impacts, as well as new roads that will be built and existing roads that will need to be improved. And I thought it would be a good idea to list a few highlights of improvements that were identified in the traffic analysis. We expect about $500 million in roadway improvements when all is said and done. And here's a list of some of the road and intersection improvements we'll see. You can see some of the roadway widenings and extensions, Eagles Nest, Jackson Highway, Kiefer, Sunrise, South Watt, to name a few. Some of the intersections improvements we note are Jackson and Sunrise, Jackson and Bradshaw, Floor and Excelsior. And we also have another category called roadway functionality improvements. And because of the nature of this development out in sort of what in some parts of this part of the county is rural in nature, there's a lot of 2-lane existing roads that are maybe don't have shoulders or don't have road widths that are quite up to a minimum standard. And so one of the impacts and mitigation measures identified in this plan is to bring some of those roads, as they start to see traffic from development, up to a minimum standard of 12-foot lanes and 5 to 6 foot shoulders. And we call those roadway functionality improvements. Now, although this workshop is really not intended to dig into the funding of transportation mitigation, but rather present the process for delivering those mitigation measures, I wanted to briefly point out a few things worth mentioning. It's the public facilities finance plan that will fund the traffic mitigations. Now, in past practice, for developments in close proximity to one another, like these plan areas are, each finance plan would have called for each development to fund 100% of overlapping improvements. But what we're doing in the Jackson corridor is having each of the 4 developments pay their fair share toward overlapping improvements. And this will allow the fees to remain reasonable and will also assure that the funding for roadway improvements will still be available and they'll be implemented in a timely manner to support the growth in those land uses. And here's one final slide on transportation funding before we moved on to the proposed transportation mitigation strategy. This slide, which is in your agenda package, was prepared by special districts to illustrate the universe of transportation funding for each individual plan area, including trails, transit, on-site roadways, other jurisdictions, and regional roadways categories. These are the costs that will be included in each individual finance plan. And as we move forward and talk about the transportation mitigation strategy, we're only talking about the items in red, which are strictly regional roadways, including facilities that overlap with the SCTDF, as well as functionality improvements and certain intersection improvements that don't overlap with the SCTDF. The strategy won't include trails, transit, on-site roads, and other jurisdiction contributions. So earlier we talked about how the traffic study identified improvements needed to mitigate impacts. With the Jackson Corridor development projects, we're looking to adopt a new policy regarding how required transportation improvements are assigned. So in order to do that, we need to take a quick look at the history of mitigation strategies. So with this first bullet item, in the early 1990s, developers would pay the county the fees to the county, and the county would be responsible to deliver improvements. But what we saw was happening was that the county could not always deliver improvements in a timely manner. So in the mid-2000s, the county started to require developers to deliver the improvements based on triggers. This system worked in a good economy, but as the downturn happened, many of the developers couldn't afford to deliver the triggered improvements because they weren't always financially sized in proportion to the development increments, so development was held up. And also the improvements were not always located near their specific development. So today, in this last bullet, what we're presenting is a new strategy that's more dynamic, where each increment of development is assigned improvements based on its size, its location, and its impact. So what I'm showing here is an example of the current trigger methodology. Development goes in at this location. Traffic goes on these roadways. But the triggered improvements that were determined years earlier based on phasing assumptions that are no longer valid are somewhere else, and most of the time they aren't financially proportional to the development size, so they're not affordable for this development to deliver. The new transportation mitigation strategy proposes assignment of improvements based on each development's increment size, its impacts, and its fair share fees. The strategy will replace the current practice of assigning triggers with a microanalysis of each development increment using a newly developed dynamic implementation tool. Without going into the details, each plan area is broken into smaller districts. Staff enters the details of development increment into the tool. The tool distributes the trips to the network and identifies road and intersection impacts and the necessary improvements. So if we go through the previous example again on the slide, but now apply the new strategy, we'll see improvements in close proximity to development, and they'll be financially proportioned in size to the development and will be affordable for the developer to build. The development will go in here, the traffic will go in there, and the tool will identify improvements at that location.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So on that tool, once we, how often do we update and refresh that tool to make sure that it's taking the latest and greatest information? Because this is going to be a long
long process for decades. Yeah. We've built in, and I'm not going over every detail as I kind of tried to mention earlier, but I think we attached it to the packet, 7 pages worth of explanation. But it's a good question, and it's in there, and the answer is at least every 5 years. Okay. If we do updates to general plans or other major documents that we have, we might do it less than every 5 years, but we would be updating that. We'd update it with development that has occurred since in that 5-year increment, put it in, do new traffic counts, establish a new baseline, and then start using it again going forward.
So please, no, go.
I'm just a question on this. So would other, like City of Sacramento, Rancho, and Folsom, because their travelers would potentially be using the county roads too, how do they contribute, or do they contribute to this strategy?
That's a good question. The way it works is we have the ability to condition or ask our developers to pay for this. We can't ask other jurisdictions to pay for this, but the county has a policy, and we are actively engaged in that policy for when developments outside of our jurisdiction, across those jurisdictional lines, like the city of Sacramento, like in the city of Rancho Cordova, come forward. They go through the similar environmental CEQA process. They identify traffic impacts. My staff and myself ask those jurisdictions to identify impacts into our jurisdictions on our roadways. And then we want to financially participate and have reciprocal funding agreements with one another. So we don't ask them to pay for this, but when they develop and traffic is generated on those roads that are going to be coming into our county, we ask them to enter into reciprocal funding agreements to mitigate the impacts that they're causing in our jurisdiction. As in this traffic study, we're causing impacts just across some of the jurisdictional lines, and we're doing that both ways. It's a bigger policy question that you
I'm
asked.
not sure I quite followed all that, but but the bottom line, there isn't any participation.
They do not pay us for anything here. When they have a development, say in Rancho Cordova, Sun Creek Specific Plan is a good example. I'm working right now with the city of Rancho Cordova on a development there that generates traffic, much like this generates traffic. And some of those impacts occur in the county of Sacramento.
Right.
So they have identified, and we've worked together with them to identify where those impacts are, what the mitigation would be, and what the cost would be. And then we agree, as two jurisdictions, Rancho and County of Sac, agree to send money to each other to mitigate what we impact in each other's jurisdiction. So I'm getting technical here. We're not asking another jurisdiction to pay for driving into our county as part of this process.
As far as this.
Right, but in their processes, we are identifying those impacts and mitigation measures and entering into reciprocal funding agreements to send money, have them.
So the only way the county can get money from the other jurisdictions
When they develop.
When they develop.
And I see Ron Vicari.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. My name is Ron Vicari. I'm the director of transportation. So the way it does play a role into this mitigation strategy is that we do have reciprocal funding agreements in place with the city of Rancho Cordova and the city of Sacramento. So some jurisdictions we do have those agreements in place. When that revenue comes in, that revenue can be applied to those projects. And so when a developer comes on and they have a certain development increment and it generates a certain amount of funding, if we have additional funding that's coming from the other jurisdiction, we can actually identify more projects to be built within that segment. And so the revenue coming in through reciprocal funding agreements does help deliver infrastructure faster, but it is a separate policy.
So what we're looking at, what we're getting updated is uniquely focused, and it's not the bigger funding process. That's an oversimplification, but I'm gathering.
That's fair.
So basically, the development funding by the developers is the minimum to meet the requirements, and if I get additional funding from other jurisdictions, the county improvement just gets a little bigger.
And we'd be able to,
exactly.
We'd be able to deliver the infrastructure quicker and in front of development, and would be able to bring more projects in.
Okay, I understand the sort of globalness of that. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a little bit similar to Folsom that has 3 bridges used by everybody but Folsom. And the huge impact it has on the city for that kind of traffic coming from all over. A quick question. I'm still not clear about who's responsible for actually building these improvements. I know this is the funding plan, but I think you said that in 2000 or 1990s, the difficulty was the county was not able to actually build, or is the county still responsible for getting this done?
No. So, yeah, let me try and clarify a couple of the things I heard you ask. So what I'm trying to show in this slide is that the way that it used to be done is that if a development like this came in, there would be mitigations identified, improvements of it at an intersection, roadway widenings, etc. But back then, we used to ask, and we would find out how much all those improvements were, total them up. You owe $100 million. So then if you had, let's just say you had a certain number of developments, you take that $100 million and then you spread it out over each of those house rooftops, right? So each time a rooftop comes in, they pay a fee. Mm-hmm. And once they get all their rooftops in, they should have generated $100 million. So what would happen is they would simply pay that to the county, and then the county, it fell to the county to say, oh, hey, Calvine Road is level service F. We need to go out and widen that road for them. We've got $50 million that have come in so far. We've got money to do that. But what happened was the county could never keep up with development, as we saw in the early 2000s, took off. houses kept coming, and we couldn't keep up with that. So we came up with the mid-2000s strategy of triggers, which is kind of still in triggers in a certain form exist today, and we're trying to move away from that for Jackson. And with triggers, the issue is maybe you get to 500 units built in Florin Vineyard Community Plan, and then there's $10 million worth of work that has to get done and built. So we're saying before somebody gets to 500 units, or when somebody gets to 501, those $10 million of impacts needs to be in, and it's you, developer, that can't go past 500 until you put those in. And that gets the county out of the delivery mode. It makes sure that not too much traffic gets there before the improvements need to be in. But sometimes what happens is we're up to 490 units and somebody comes in with 50 houses and they trip it. They're the one who has to install $10 million worth of improvements. And that has proven to stall development. So we're trying to come up with a way now that, and I haven't finished this, I've got 2 more slides that explain the money part. But maybe if I finish those 2 slides, it'll answer where I'm going. So we're going to have a tool. I can answer part of it and then get to this. But the tool will more dynamically, like say somebody comes in with 300 houses, it's more labor intensive for staff, but we can now get a better feel for this development. These 300 houses are coming in near the corner of Watt and Florin or something like that. We put this into a spreadsheet-based dynamic tool. It'll assign those trips from those 300 probably through that intersection. We know that intersection is identified as needed improvement, whereas before, and then we will have a financial check, which I'll talk about in a second, that will also say, well, for 300 units, we expect so many dollars of improvement to be built. So it's a more labor-intensive, technical side of our house effort that will, we think, help development not get stopped by a trigger, and at the same time get improvements at the locations they are needed, financially sized to the development increment that comes in. So we want to move away from triggers.
And if I could just mention one thing. Yeah,
no, please go ahead.
Yeah, in addition to what Matt said, as far as the other piece of the question, which is who will actually be delivering the infrastructure, it will be a combined effort. The development will be 100% will be what's generating the revenue to do that. But oftentimes, an example would be South Watt, that a lot of development has the requirement to fund that facility. It's a high priority to the county. In Department of Transportation, we're moving forward with the design of that infrastructure now. We will be delivering that, but we will be relying on that revenue in order to deliver that infrastructure. But there's also times that the county's not moving forward on that project, and the developer is going to be required to be the one not only funding it, as they do in every case for these projects, but also in delivering that infrastructure. So it'll be a mix of developer-delivered projects and county-delivered projects.
So the developers would actually create an intersection with traffic lights and striping and curbs and...
That's correct.
Thank you.
And then I'll knock out these last 2 slides, and there'll probably be some more questions. All right. So once the tool identifies the need actually step back. Let me remind you, we ended with that example now, trying to show why the dynamic implementation methodology is better. And so once the tool identifies the needed improvements, staff will check the development increments funding obligation, which is defined as the number of the units coming in for the increment times the fee per unit. Staff will assign build improvements that cost up to 100% of that funding obligation. So if the build improvements cost less than the funding obligation, the difference in dollars will be collected in a reserve fund that can be used to fund larger improvements. So I have an example here at the bottom of this slide. I'm going to try to very simple example, but I try to simplify it. So a developer, let's say, comes in with 300 dwelling units, and you can think of, if you want, 300 dwelling units as 300 houses. And each dwelling unit or house has to pay $15,000 in roadway fees, because we know that that's what the list of mitigation measures adds up to, divided by the total number of dwelling units in the whole plan. Each one owes $15,000. So what the fee increment would be in this particular case would be 300 times $15,000, which gets us $4.5 million. So then we would identify an improvement that comes out of the tool, the dynamic implementation tool, that the developer should construct up to $4.5 million. So let's say an intersection, let's just say an intersection at Gerber and Waterman comes out of the tool, it needs to be improved or signalized or something, and it costs $4.3 million, and we know that these guys come in with 300 dwelling units and they owe $15,000 a dwelling unit, which means $4.5 million. The tool tells us that intersection needs to be improved. It costs $4.3 million. We assign the developer that improvement, and we collect the $0.2 million in a reserve fund for us to keep for later and throw at a bigger project that might come in down the road.
And if it costs them $5.3 million?
And if it costs them that's a great question, because that's something that I know would come up. If it costs them more than their development increment, we have the ability to take their $4.5 million and hold on to it. We have the ability and hold on to it till the next person comes in, adds their money to the pot. Hey, we still need that intersection. We'll assign the next person that intersection with their financial obligation. Plus we have $4.5 million we can give them to complete the project. And that's why we have talked about establishing a reserve fund, because this whole thing will be incremental. Somebody will come in with 300 units and this will be needed. If their fee obligation is 4.5 and it's less, they build it. If the cost of that particular improvement's greater than, and we've got that money in reserve, we throw that money at it, they still deliver it. Or if it's, let's just make it bigger, it's a $7 million improvement, but their obligation's 4.5, and we don't have the difference to cover it up. We have the ability to take in $4.5 million and hold on to it. We could decide to deliver it if we have other funding sources, Measure A, or we get grants, or we can hold on to it till the next guy comes in, because this whole thing will be incremental. Once you put something into the tool, it's sort of an additive process. Those 300 units calling for the improvement at that intersection won't go away. If we add something else to another 250 units to the tool, it'll still show that we need an intersection there. So, sometimes we'll have more revenue than we need, sometimes we'll have less, and that's how we'll cobble together along. And there are some in-depth examples in the mitigation strategy, which I think was attached to your packet. I think there were 3. Todd, is that right? There were 3 examples at the very back of that 7 or 8 page strategy that you should have that are very detailed. Situation where we're under or we're over, and answers that question very clearly, hopefully.
So I'm trying to differentiate, and I apologize if I'm missing the point. I'm trying to differentiate between what happened in the past where the dominoes stopped falling. They stopped building, but that improvement was really desperately needed.
Absolutely.
How is this different from that?
What's happening right now, because I can tell you it's going on in some of the Florin Vineyard Community Plan and North Vineyard Station, development's stopped. Nobody's taking a bite because they know they're the next one. They're going to have to deliver $10 million worth of improvements, and they're not big enough.
Right.
So development is not happening. So we're trying to solve that. And so if no development is happening, we're still getting traffic from some of these other jurisdictions because they're developing, and those trips are coming into our jurisdiction. The capacity of our roadways will go down. If we're not getting revenue from this development, we don't have money to build these roads from development fees. So we need development to keep occurring in the sense that the revenue will come in to mitigate these impacts. But the big problem with the triggers is this financial component, because there's no financial check on if I'm 50 units coming in, but I trip that thing and I owe $10 million. I just owe it $10 million. I just either have to sit and not develop and have to wait till some big guy comes in and absorbs a lot of the land, or I have to partner up with somebody like that because I can't afford to do it because we don't have this financial check. Well, we do now. That's what we're trying to do with this tool.
So we don't actually have the money, but we're anticipating we would have the money under this funding mechanism?
It's really, it's really the financial obligation. Each development unit that comes in, as a developer comes to the counter, and in this example I had that they owed $15,000 per unit. That's really the money we're talking about. So if you bring in 300 units at $15,000 a unit, they would have to, if we were in the original scenario where we just collected fees and then we let them develop and the county had to try and keep up with roadway improvements, we would have just collected $4.5 million and said, here's your 300 building permits, go ahead and build your houses, traffic comes and we'll get around to that stuff later. This is sort of a happy medium. So, because we jumped to triggers and triggers stopped development, right? Well, now we're saying, you've got $4.5 million to spend. We want you to spend it, and by constructing $4.5 million worth of improvements. We're not going to make you spend $10 million if you only owe 4.5. We're going to make you spend 4.5, and you either get a project that's up to $4.5 million and you go build it, or you give it to us, and the next guy that comes in, we'll take his $4.2 million and we'll put that together, and we'll have 9.7 to actually get something built. And we're going to do that incrementally throughout the process. So there will be some people that come in and get assigned. The tool tells us there's a $7 million project that's necessary, but they only are $4.5 million financially responsible. We're not going to make them build the $7 million project unless we've got the difference to cobble with their $4.5 million responsibility to do it. And we hope we are going to get it by having this reserve fund. But that's the key. We want to incrementally allow development to go, but we also want to incrementally get our improvements instead of just stop development or not be able to keep up. So this is a nice happy medium. That's why it's being proposed.
If I could add one thing, an additional advantage to this is this strategy takes every dollar that comes in and uses a traffic study to analyze what the highest priority improvement is based on where that development's occurring, whether it's in the top of a development, the bottom of a development. It really shows you what the most needed and highest priority improvement is. So every dollar that comes in, we then focus on the greatest impacts that's being generated by that exact development. And so it allows us to keep up with development, move, and spend the money in the most effective way based upon how the development occurs. And then as we're moving along, we continue to build these high priority improvements every time a new developer comes in. The way it worked before, to give you a little differentiation between what's been in the past, is we would maybe set a trigger, for instance, at 2,000 houses, or DUEs as we call it. Development would occur, we'd be probably spending the money on triggers. Sometimes development occurs 15 years after the actual triggers have been put in place. So we'd be spending the money on some of the triggers, but not necessarily where the impacts are. But everything would be going along smoothly until we hit that 2,000 DUE point. At that point, if those triggers haven't been put in place, everything stops. And so until you can get past that infrastructure. And so as Matt said, if that trigger happens to be a $10 million project, well, you South Watt, it's a $30 million project. If South Watt was the trigger, $30 million at 2,000 DUEs, and we're at 1,950, and somebody comes in with a 55 unit development that's only going to have a small amount of $1 million in revenue, there's no way they can go until someone builds South Watt. So they just have to wait until that trigger. So this allows us to systematically look at the highest priority, be focusing on our money where it's needed, and also make sure that the infrastructure keeps up with that development. I don't know if that helped.
It was very helpful. Thank you. Both of your explanations were very helpful. I won't really dig into who's actually going to break ground and pour concrete. that my perception is that's still a weakness in this plan, but has to be managed too. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to piggyback on that for me. So if I understand it, with this new program, it's not focused on dollars, but it's focused on the scope of improvements needed, right? That's what defines.
This program replaces the triggers, and the triggers were a program that identified when a mitigation measure was needed. So yes, it's when we assign the improvement,
But
and how.
this way, what I'm hearing is you're looking at what the actual work is, instead of the whole $10 million, you're looking at what's the focus need for the dollars that are available.
Absolutely, yes.
And then let me ask, and maybe this too early on, depending on who builds it, does it have to go to public works bid? And does it have to go prevailing wage? Because if a developer builds it, does he have to bid at public works and go prevailing wage? Or can he deliver the project as like a developer that delivers it?
So
A developer
I'll jump in
bidding
and let you-
process.
So I'll jump first and then let Ron close it out. So I just to address the fact of who builds stuff, the intent is the developers will be assigned projects based on this financial constraint, if you will, their financial proportionality of their development increment. We're going to have them build it. There are certain things, as I understand, and Ron can jump in here, where there are certain projects the county has to deliver if they're Measure A, et cetera. And Ron, am I saying that correct? That there are certain ones the county has to deliver.
Yeah, and the reason is if it is a Measure A funded project, if there's federal funds that we can have supplement the cost of the infrastructure, then if the county delivers it, we can realize those funds. And so, oftentimes it's a greater advantage to have a county delivered project. Okay. Sometimes not.
So, but you evaluate that as part of
what money is
gives
there available.
Most value for the dollar.
Yes.
For the development, I'm guessing, right?
Right.
And you know, in that instance, we're a partner with the developer, in that both the developer and the county are trying to work together to deliver the most infrastructure as fast as we can to be out in front of development. So it's in both of our best interests to build them all as effectively as we can. And so if we can utilize other funding, it doesn't mean that the developer pays less in fees. It means that maybe now we can assign them an additional project that we can deliver ahead of time. That's really how we strategize that. You know, if there's a $10 million project and there's $5 million worth of Measure A, for instance, that if the county delivered we could utilize, then we can assign them that project, utilize the $5 million in Measure A, and assign them an additional $5 million project, which gets us even farther out in front of development, gets the county more infrastructure that's going to help support and make our traffic move smoother.
Not really a different topic, but slightly different nuance. The bus fees, is that part of this at all, where each household has to pay, I don't know, I think it's an annual fee for the buses to run close to their home?
Yes.
But there's no commitment from the county or RT that they absolutely must provide bus service. Is that correct?
So the trip reduction strategies that Matt talked about in the start, which include all of the shuttle services, as well as other TMA, traffic management stuff, is all being funded by the developer. So there is a strategy and this connects to the RT system, because this is outside of where RT covers, the zone in which it covers. So we're connecting to light rail stations. In that case, there's a strategy as to, we want to encourage as many people to utilize the service as possible, therefore keep the cars off the road. And so there is a strategy towards keeping the fares lower and having a higher cost. But the costs are generated by it's really an annexation into, most likely will be an annexation into a benefit zone of an existing, I don't want to get too technical here, but it's called CSA 10. But it will, on a yearly basis, will be paid into by the people who occupy the housing, and also occupy all the retail and what we call DUE. Everyone will be paying into this service. It will fully support the service, and it will connect to the existing system through either a light rail station or to an existing bus network.
Thank you.
Okay. And so I just have this last slide, and it's just some of the guiding, I've listed here some of the guiding principles of the strategy. So I'll just go through this, and that'll conclude my presentation. So the minimum development increment size, we are asking for people to come in with 300 dwelling units at a minimum. But the SACDOC director has the ability to grant exceptions to small, what we're calling mom and pop developments. Sometimes somebody wants to come in with 10 lots here, 50 lots there, and they're not the big developer. So there's a strategy or clause to have the ability to just collect funds on that, because they aren't going to generate enough fees to build anything significant. And the primary funding comes from these plan area fees, typically as credits against the fees due. And we recognize other funding sources like grants, SCTDF, fees, and Measure A, like we mentioned earlier. We're going to have written agreements that will define the requirements of delivery and timing of the assigned improvements and the fee and reimbursements with each particular development that we assign improvement to. So it'll tell us when they're going to start and finish and all those details. The timing requirements generally for construction of the assigned improvements are going to start before 25% of building permits are issued for residential development and prior to occupancy for non-residential. And then, of course, there's an appeal process to the Board of Supervisors if we get to a situation where we've identified a particular impact and mitigation measure to decide to assign to a developer, and the developer and us can't come to that agreement. We've got the ability to take that to the board to get it cleared up. And so that really concludes my presentation. And I wanted to point out again that the board adopted this strategy in July. So when each individual plan comes through in the near future, this is really the strategy that we're talking about. So that wraps up my presentation. And I know there are a lot of questions. If there's any more, I'm here to try and help. And those questions were really good questions.
Well, that would be Alan.
I'm giving you guys all the credit, actually.
Thank you.
But if there's anything else, please.
I just had one. I think you mentioned that there's some other developments that are stalled out. Have you looked at taking this process and maybe implementing there too as well?
How did you guess that was my next assignment after this? Yes, yeah. We've started to do that over the last month. Yeah.
Well,
I'm calling it the retrofit effort. Retrofitting this process to the trigger process.
The goal is to have something as we move forward by July of next year that we've looked at. Can this apply? And just so you know, the strategy is a strategy that's very beneficial to a lot of those developments, but there's also the legal pieces of what's been already put in place and how it's been put in place, whether it's conditions of development or environmental documents. So we're looking at just what can be done without, of course, we're looking at both aspects of what could be done without opening up environmental documents and going back through that. And then we're also looking at if a developer was willing to go back through the process in order to utilize a more effective strategy, what can be done. And so we're working with each individual development that has triggers placed on it at this time to see what can be done.
Have you had feedback from the development community about the change in strategy?
Yes. And some of the developers are here now, but it's been a collaborative effort. We've been working through this for about, I'd say a year. And there's been, I think we're on
Revision 7, 8, or 9.
Yeah, revision 7, 8, or 9. And I think it's been very beneficial. It's been very helpful. It was a really difficult problem to solve, and it was something that I think developers saw as an issue with being able to move forward, and I think we've really come up with something that I think the county can assure the infrastructure will be put in place in a timely manner, and also that fees aren't so excessive that nothing can get built. And so I think we've landed after a year of a lot of work on a strategy that we believe will be a big benefit in the future.
Good. Because this is a workshop, are we entertaining comments from the public? Is that part of this process?
If there are any, yes.
Okay. Well, my little screen isn't working, so I wasn't sure.
Oh, there are 2 public speakers signed up to speak.
Oh, good. Okay. I just can't see that, so thank you. I see now.
Okay.
So did you have additional
No,
questions?
so you're there.
Good, thank you. So Jim Wiley?
Good evening, Commissioners. Jim Wiley and Grant Taylor with Stonebridge and Jackson Township, and we're both here to support the program and indicate our thanks to the staff. And I don't know if you have anything else to say, Grant.
Stonebridge is West Jackson Highway Master Plan. Just to echo Jim, thanks for all of your help and collaboration, all the iterations on the drafts over the last year. So looking forward to continue working with you guys.
We look forward to seeing you with the projects pretty soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Full disclosure, I was able to meet with Jim and be briefed partially on this. Thank you. Grant Taylor?
That was Grant.
Oh, Grant. Oh, I'm sorry. You guys came up together. Good. Anyone else? No? Okay. Additional comments? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have the planning director's report now.
Yes.
Is that right?
Item number
Thank you.
6, planning director's report.
So I only have a couple of things to mention to you. The first is that because of the holiday schedule, we will only have one meeting in October, one meeting in November, and then one meeting in December. We have a number of items queuing up for that October 28th meeting. That's why we were querying the commissioners to try to find an extra date in November. It doesn't appear that all of you will be available on either the 4th or I believe it was the 18th. So we'll have to make some decisions about whether or not to add one of those dates. But it seems likely given the number of items. I think we have currently about 10 items for October 28th. A number of them are going to take quite a bit of time. I believe we have the EJ element that's coming on October 28th, as well as the modifications to the community planning advisory councils. We're working on bringing that on October 28th as well. So I'm envisioning a number of items that are going to take a good amount of time, and we will try to push items to the November meeting that maybe aren't as critical, or we can have a little bit of delay on those. In addition to that, I also just wanted to make note for the commission that on October 8th, the board will be hearing an appeal for that New York Avenue subdivision that the Planning Commission heard about maybe a month and a half ago or so.
Okay, August, I think, right?
It might have been. And that was the item where there were, just like this evening, 3 members present, and there was a 2-to-1 vote in favor of the item, and because the 3 members weren't in the affirmative, the item was denied. And so the board is taking that item up on appeal from the applicant, and that's going on October 8th in the event that you're interested in that item. So that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. So in October, it's just, we're only meeting on the 28th?
That's correct.
And then November, it's the...
Currently, it's only the November, late November. It's 26th, right after the Thanksgiving holiday.
Okay.
However, we're looking at either the 4th or 18th, I believe, are the 2 dates that we asked you about.
Yeah. Okay.
I can do the
Thank
4th, I
you.
can't do the 18th.
Yeah, and I think there's if I remember correctly, I think maybe Kara can do the 18th, but not the 4th or something like that. It just doesn't seem that we'll get all 5 on either the 4th or 18th.
Okay.
And the meeting for November is scheduled for November 24th.
24th, thank you. Okay. All right. Okay. Are we,
Item number 7 is miscellaneous scheduling matters, and I think we just covered that.
Yeah.
And then public comment. I don't have any other speakers signed up to speak.
thank you. We're adjourned.
It's the 25th, right? I think, November.
Is that a Monday is the 25th?
Oh, you're right, the 25th.
5th?
I will not be here.
On the 24th or the 25th?